There's a photograph from May 2003 that still circulates on Italian football forums. Andriy Shevchenko, shirt soaked through, is holding the Champions League trophy above his head at Old Trafford. And if you look closely at his face, you'll see something beyond joy. Relief, maybe, or vindication. He just scored the winning penalty in a shootout against Juventus, the culmination of a season in which he terrorised every defence Serie A could offer. But here's what makes that image haunting. 3 years later, in a different league, wearing different colours, that same face would carry a different expression entirely. Confusion, frustration, the look of a man who'd forgotten how to do the thing that once came as naturally as breathing. The question isn't what happened to Shevchenko at Chelsea. The question is how a player so complete, so devastatingly effective in one environment could look so diminished in another. And the answer tells you more about football's cruelty than any missed penalty or injury ever could. To understand what Shevchenko was at Milan, you need to understand what Serie A demanded of strikers in that era. This wasn't the Premier League's chaos or La Liga's technical exhibition. Italian football in the early 2000s was a tactical laboratory where defenders studied attackers like scientists, where every movement was catalogued, every weakness exploited. Shevchenko didn't just survive in that environment. He thrived in it, became its most complete predator. He arrived from Dynamo Kiev in 1999 for $26 million, a fortune then, carrying the weight of being the most expensive Ukrainian player in history. Milan's ultras were sceptical. They'd seen expensive imports before, seen them wilt under the pressure of the San Siro's expectations. But Shevchenko scored on his debut against Lazio, a clinical finish that announced not just talent but understanding. He knew where to be, when to move, how to exploit the half-second of space. Italian defenders would concede. What made him special wasn't just the goals, though there were plenty. 24 in his first season, then 24 again, then a Ballon d'Or winning campaign in 2004, where he scored 28 across all competitions. It was the completeness. He could drop deep and link play, his first touch so assured that midfielders trusted him in tight spaces. He could run channels, his acceleration over 10 yards making him lethal on the counter. He could finish with either foot, could head, could score from distance, or tap-ins with equal composure. Filippo Inzaghi, his strike partner, once said in an interview with La Gazzetta dello Sport, "Sheva made me better because defenders had to think about him first. But I made him better too because he knew I'd be there. We didn't need to talk, we just knew." That partnership, that understanding was built on hundreds of training sessions, on a system that Ancelotti had refined to extract maximum efficiency from both men. The cultural significance went beyond Milan. For Ukraine, still finding its identity as an independent nation after the Soviet collapse, Shevchenko was a symbol of possibility. When he won the Ballon d'Or in 2004, beating Ronaldinho and Thierry Henry, Ukrainian television interrupted regular programming to broadcast the ceremony live. President Kuchma called him personally. In Kiev, people gathered in Maidan Square to celebrate, not because of a political victory, but because one of their own had been recognized as the best footballer on the planet. The pressure of that representation never seemed to weigh on him at Milan. If anything, it elevated his performances. In the 2003 Champions League final, with Milan trailing Juventus in the shootout, he stepped up for the decisive penalty and struck it with such certainty that Buffon didn't move. Gazetta's headline the next morning read, "The Ukrainian Tsar crowns Milan." Another paper called him Il nostro Sheva, our Sheva. He'd become more than a foreign import. He'd become theirs. By 2006, Shevchenko had scored 173 goals in 296 appearances for Milan. He'd won a Champions League, a Scudetto, and individual honours that placed him among the era's elite. He was 30 years old, still at his peak, still the player defences feared most. And then came the choice that would redefine how people remembered him. Chelsea had been circling for years. Roman Abramovich, the Russian oligarch who'd transformed the London club into a financial superpower, wanted Shevchenko as a statement signing. Not just a player, but a symbol of Chelsea's ambition to dominate Europe. Jose Mourinho, Chelsea's manager, was less convinced. He had Didier Drogba, a striker whose physical presence and work rate fit perfectly into his system. Mourinho's Chelsea was built on defensive solidity, on transitions, on controlled aggression. Shevchenko's game, refined in Milan's possession-based, technically sophisticated system, didn't obviously fit. But Abramovich insisted, and in the summer of 2006, Chelsea paid Milan £30 million to bring Shevchenko to Stamford Bridge. The fee made him the most expensive player over 30 in history at that time. The announcement was made on a humid July afternoon in London. Shevchenko sat beside Peter Kenyon, Chelsea's chief executive, wearing a blue shirt that looked slightly too big, smiling for cameras, but with eyes that seemed uncertain. In the press conference, he spoke about new challenges, about wanting to test himself in the Premier League, about respecting Mourinho's vision, but those who knew him well noticed something. Andriy Shevchenko had never needed to prove himself anywhere. He'd already done that. This wasn't ambition, it was something else. Later, much later, he'd admit in interviews that the decision was influenced by factors beyond football. His wife, American model Kristen Pazik, preferred London to Milan. Abramovich, a fellow Eastern European, had made personal appeals. Milan, facing financial pressures, had been willing to sell. The perfect storm of circumstances that had nothing to do with whether Chelsea's system suited his game. His debut came in August against Manchester City. Stamford Bridge was full, expectant, ready to welcome their marquee signing. Shevchenko played 70 minutes and looked lost. Not slow, not unfit. Lost. Chelsea's tempo was different, more direct. Drogba occupied the spaces Shevchenko wanted. The service came in different rhythms, different angles. He had one chance, a header from 8 yards that he directed straight at the goalkeeper, the kind of opportunity he'd have buried 100 times at Milan. The crowd applauded politely when he was substituted, but you could feel the confusion. This was supposed to be one of Europe's deadliest strikers. Where was the predator they'd been promised? The weeks that followed were worse. Mourinho started him sporadically, often playing him out wide or in a deeper role to accommodate Drogba. Shevchenko's movement, so instinctive at Milan, seemed mistimed at Chelsea. He'd make runs that teammates didn't see. He'd drop deep, expecting combinations that didn't come. By November, he'd scored just 4 goals. The British tabloids, never subtle, began their dissection. Shevchenko, more like Shev Stinko, read one headline. Another, £30 million flop. The cruelty was casual, relentless. Mourinho in press conferences offered faint praise that felt like criticism. Shaver is working hard, adapting to a new league. The subtext was clear, he wasn't good enough. What made it worse was the visibility of the decline. This wasn't a player fading quietly at a mid-table club. This was Chelsea, Premier League champions, playing twice a week on television, every match scrutinised. Every heavy touch, every missed chance, every moment of hesitation was replayed, analysed, mammed before memes were ubiquitous. Shevchenko's face during matches began to show something Milan fans had never seen: doubt. In one match against Arsenal, he was through on goal, one-on-one with Jens Lehmann, the kind of situation he'd converted countless times. He took too long, tried to round the keeper, and was dispossessed. The Emirates crowd jeered. Chelsea fans groaned. Shevchenko walked back to position with his head down, and for a moment he looked like a man who'd forgotten who he used to be. The media reaction was swift and unforgiving. British newspapers ran features comparing his Chelsea statistics to his Milan peak, the numbers stark and damning. 4 goals became 7, then 9 across an entire season, a total that represented barely a quarter of his usual output. Italian journalists, protective of Serie A's reputation, framed it differently. The Premier League has exposed him, some wrote, while others argued Chelsea's system has wasted him. Gazzetta dello Sport published an interview with Ancelotti, who'd left Milan for Chelsea midway through Shevchenko's second season. Ancelotti was diplomatic but honest. Andriy is a player who needs certain conditions to excel. He needs movement around him, he needs to play centrally, he needs confidence. At Milan, we built the team to give him those things. At Chelsea, the team was already built around someone else. Shevchenko himself rarely complained publicly. In interviews, he spoke about adaptation, about patience, about respecting the manager's decisions. But those close to him told a different story. Friends mentioned that he'd watch videos of his Milan goals late at night, trying to understand what had changed. teammates at Chelsea, speaking years later, admitted they didn't know how to play with him. Frank Lampard said in his autobiography, "Shaver was clearly a great player, but he and Didier wanted the same spaces. One of them had to compromise, and it was never going to be Didier. He was already our main man." The system that had made Shevchenko unstoppable at Milan, the quick combinations, the intelligent movement, the service tailored to his strengths, didn't exist at Chelsea. And without it, he was just another striker, ordinary and replaceable. By the time he left Chelsea in 2008, returning to Dynamo Kiev on loan before eventually retiring, the narrative was set. Shevchenko had become a cautionary tale, a symbol of how transfers could go wrong, how even great players could fail. The £30 million became a punchline. Fantasy football players joked about him. YouTube compilations of worst signings featured his missed chances set to mocking music. The Ballon d'Or winner, the Champions League hero, the man who terrorised Serie A for 7 years, was remembered in England primarily for what he couldn't do. Ukrainian fans never forgot his greatness, but globally, the Chelsea years overshadowed everything else. It's a strange cruelty of modern football that 2 mediocre seasons can redefine a decade of brilliance. What's been lost in that narrative is the context. Shevchenko didn't suddenly become a bad player at 30. His technique didn't vanish. His football intelligence didn't disappear. What changed was everything around him: the system, the role, the service, the expectations. At Milan, he was the centerpiece of a team designed to maximize his strengths. At Chelsea, he was an expensive addition to a machine that already functioned perfectly without him. Mourinho's reluctance to sign him wasn't arrogance. It was tactical clarity. He knew his system didn't need what Shevchenko offered, but Abramovich's insistence, the financial power that made the transfer possible, overrode that clarity. And Shevchenko, caught between a manager who didn't want him and an owner who did, paid the price. Looking back now, nearly 2 decades later, you see similar stories play out every transfer window. World-class players moving to clubs where the fit is wrong, where the system doesn't suit them, where the pressure to justify the fee becomes suffocating. Romelu Lukaku at Chelsea, a different era but the same dynamic. A proven goal-scorer rendered ineffective by a system that didn't play to his strengths. The difference is that modern discourse, shaped by social media and analytics, is slightly more willing to ask why a player failed rather than just mocking the failure. We talk about tactical fit now, about squad harmony, about whether a signing makes sense beyond the name and the price tag. Shevchenko's Chelsea move happened just before that shift in understanding. He was judged by the old metrics: goals, performances, whether he looked worth the money, without much consideration for whether the environment allowed him to succeed. Shevchenko himself has been gracious about it. In a 2019 interview, managing Ukraine's national team, he was asked about Chelsea. He smiled, that same smile from the 2003 Champions League final, and said, "I have no regrets. I tried. Something, it didn't work, but I learned. At Milan, everything was perfect for me. At Chelsea, it wasn't." That's football. You can't control everything. There's a dignity in that response, a refusal to blame anyone, but also an acknowledgement of the truth, that greatness isn't just about the player, it's about the context that allows greatness to flourish. Strip away that context, and even the best can look ordinary. The photograph from Old Trafford in 2003 still circulates, but now it carries a different weight. It's not just a celebration, it's a reminder of what Shevchenko was when everything aligned, when the system, the teammates, the league, and the moment all conspired to let him be complete. The Chelsea years didn't erase that. They just complicated the story, added a chapter that people remember more vividly because decline is always more dramatic than sustained excellence. But if you watched him at Milan, if you saw what he could do when the conditions were right, you know the truth. Andriy Shevchenko wasn't a flop. He was a masterpiece placed in the wrong frame. Do you remember watching him at Milan, or did Chelsea define how you saw him? I'd be curious to know which version you remember first.